Good morning. My name is Sajo Ruiz. Honored to be here with my friends and also colleagues, Inés and Antonio. We're here to talk about Lights, Camera, Impact, Puerto Rico's film industry on the global stage. But before I begin, I want to kind of go back in history and explain a little bit how Puerto Rico has been on the global stage for quite a long time. Our history dates back to 1934 with the film Romance Tropical by Juan Viguier, who was the director back then, and Rafael Muñoz, which was a very famous composer and orchestra director. He was in charge of the music for this film. And Luis Pales Matos, who was a writer, a poet, was in charge of writing the script for the movie. The interesting thing about this movie is that it was the first film with sound in Puerto Rico, and it was the second with sound in Spanish worldwide. So you can see by our activities that we go way back. Going global was also thanks to the advertising film industry. Advertising has always been strong on this island. That is my background. Big brands and big agencies have also played a part since the early days of TV and cinema. Viguier was a pioneer, and then studios tagged along like Guastela Film, Gede Film, Sonofilm, followed by the great talent that we have here today in Puerto Rico. Agencies like Isabel Norniella, which is now owner of a media group in Miami, Premier Maldonado, Samuel Badillo, the founder of Badillo, Sachi and Sachi, which is now Publicis, and so many other names. The island had access to capital and equipment resources from New York City and LA. Many technicians and production staff were trained in advertising cinema. So this is where the whole thing starts to spin in favor of the industry that we have today. The number of awards, for example, at Cannes Lions is a good example of how well we perform as an industry despite our small size. We even have local representation in the Cannes Lions Advertising Festival. Puerto Rico has also developed a lot of professional talent for cinema thanks to advertising investments in major productions. The Advertising Association made a study of the economic impact it has in Puerto Rico with the creative industry, and that number is at $1.6 billion, which is pretty significant and important for us to mention here today. So I want to welcome Inés and Antonio again, and together we're going to be talking about the film industry in Puerto Rico, where we are, where we've been, and where we should be, and how this should improve coming forward into the future. So I'm going to pass the mic on to Inés, who's going to talk a little bit about Puerto Rico in the U.S. movie production market. Inés?
Thank you, Sajo. The Puerto Rico is being inserted in the film business for quite a long time, and more than after the first pioneers that were producing films in Puerto Rico. There was a big government movement in the new era where the government was a producer for documentaries and educational films that eventually grew into well-known, recognized international feature films, such as Los Peloteros, which was a film made in 1951 and was received several awards in multiple international film festivals. So that was a really big effort that was based on the New Deal and that was using film as an educational tool to get people to change ways of life and to at that time was used to prepare the Puerto Rican people for the industrialization process. So it had a two purpose. No, it was not just artistic, it was educational. And it came out to be that the people who were watching those films ended up doing works of public works in their communities, so that it was also a relief for the government. And at that time, there were writers, painters, poets that were involved in that effort, and there were over 100 films that were produced. That ended up in 1968 approximately, and then in the 1970s we started to become a place where Puerto Rico was recognized as a destination for the production of films. One of the first films that I remember that was shot in Puerto Rico was Lord of the Flies, that was shot in Vieques Island, and it was a huge production in a really remote place that was not prepared for filmmaking, and even so, the film came out beautifully, and it's a beautiful piece to watch in black and white film. 1980s and 90s, we start receiving a lot of productions that were, like, say, Steven Spielberg, Amistad, Richard Donner, Assassins. We did Contact. We did, later came more films like Executive Decision and many other films that came to Puerto Rico because we had already developed a community of filmmakers that were well-trained and were competitive with other crew members of different other cities and states. So at that time, Puerto Rico was seen basically as a beautiful place to come shoot. But the film business has made a turn. And right now, film producers don't go to places just because they have a beautiful location. They go to places that have tax incentives. And Puerto Rico in 1999 passed a law that was very attractive. We started receiving more feature films and television series, which are one of the more attractive productions we want to have in the island. And it was all based on a 40% tax incentive of local spend and 20% on non-resident spend. And at that time, the amount of films that were coming were sufficient for the money that the government had set aside as tax incentive. But eventually, we started getting more and more productions, and that there was a cap in the law that did not allow us to grow further into the industry. One of the things that is important for us to understand is if we compare ourselves to other jurisdictions like Georgia, Georgia doesn't have a cap. And since they don't have a cap, the more business, the better. New York has just raised their tax cap from 450 million to 750 million. And our cap is very low, and it's a struggle that we're having now. I want Antonio to go ahead and explain how does it work and where do we stand in the current state of affairs.
Good morning. As Inés said, we started what I would call the modern era of the filmmaking when the government enacted the Film Incentives Act in 1999. The first projects that were able to access the incentive were in 2000 to 2002. At that time, the incentive was a 40% tax credit on payments made by the production to Puerto Rico residents. It was a transferable tax credit since the beginning because when we interviewed the studios and lenders, they preferred that the incentive be in the form of a transferable tax credit rather than a cash grant or a rebate, because tax credits, transferable tax credits, the liquidity is provided by tax buyers, by the taxpayers that acquire the credit from the production companies, rather than having to depend on a cash fund that the government controls that requires yearly budgetary appropriations. So the other factor that we put into the law that was critical was that we were the first jurisdiction in the US that required an audit prior to the government granting the incentives. So that created a lot of trust in the system and in the program. and it worked. Everything took off around 2005 when the government started investing in promoting Puerto Rico as a film destination, going to Cannes and to the American film market and promoting Puerto Rico as a destination. Then we would go along with the Film Commission to promote Puerto Rico, to explain the incentive and the capabilities in Puerto Rico. And all of that so slowly ramped up, beginning with independent productions mostly, but eventually the studios started to come to Puerto Rico. And by 2011, we were providing services to studios like Warner Brothers, Disney, Sony, Relativity, Universal. All of those were clients of Puerto Rico in 2011. In 2011, we were competing against almost 40 jurisdictions in the US that were offering incentives, particularly at that time, Louisiana. And we needed to be more competitive. So working with the tax department at Disney, we came up with the idea of increasing the incentive from not only granting 40% on payments to Puerto Rico residents, but granting a second tax credit of 20% of payments to non-residents. When the productions bring their crews or their directors or the producers or people from out of state, then the production can get a 20% tax credit. And we convinced the government that it was feasible because Puerto Rico can withhold at the source 20% on those people's compensation. And it's a wash for the government. It really didn't cost anything to the Treasury Department. And those persons can claim a foreign tax credit in their federal return. So it's a win-win for everyone. So that created a lot of demand and production all the way until 2015, in the summer of 2015, the day of my birthday, June 29, when the governor announced that Puerto Rico could not pay its debt, that it was going to default on its debt. And we lost momentum at that time. We were being catered by many of the studios, and at that time the studios said, if Puerto Rico cannot pay its debt, how can we trust that Puerto Rico is going to honor and grant us tax credits? Anyways, we were able to maintain production going within mostly independent productions. And then in 2017, the government started looking into the new incentives code. So we formed a group that we called an ad hoc group of about 15 producers and service providers. And we organized under the name of Sin Alliance, and we hired an economic firm, Estudios Técnicos, to help us put together a cost-benefit analysis of the industry. And using those numbers, we were able to convince the government to include the film program into the new incentives code. So the new incentives code that got enacted in the summer of 2019 still has a tax credit of 40% of payments to Puerto Rico residents, 20% of payments to non-residents, and an additional 15% tax credit on payments to Puerto Rico residents for those projects that are owned by Puerto Rico producer. This is an incentive for Puerto Rico productions. Everything at that time, we're like, now it's the time, at least the uncertainty is behind us. Let's move forward. None of the tax credits in the code had a cap because there was this new concept of measuring the incentives that had never been done. So that the incentives code has this, what I call the incentives code's DNA, is that the ROI, the return on investment of all incentives should be measured. And there are some basic formulas there to measure the incentives. And based on that, it was decided that no tax credits in the code were going to be capped. Fast forward into 2020, early 2020, this legislator decided that he wanted to reduce certain tax rates in unrelated industries, and he needed to pay for the revenue neutrality principle in PROMESA, in the federal legislation. He needed to pay for to complete his cuts, and he decided that he was going to use the film incentive as one of the pay-fors for that measure. He needed $12 million, and his reasoning was, well, even though the film, the incentives code doesn't have a cap, the former act had a $50 million cap. I need 12, so let's put a cap of $38 million into the incentive. which doesn't make sense in many ways. And they didn't realize, and this was approved by the board as a pay for, that by limiting the credit to $38 million, it brings the film industry to a halt, which means that it is not that you found $12 million as a pay for, is that you're losing economic activity that is generating more than $100 million in revenues. And then you're threatening hundreds of jobs and industries that support the sector. It took us 2 years to go through the legislature and working with the executive branch to fix the situation. And in theory, it got fixed in Act 5 of 2023, which was signed by the governor in January. The problem is that the Fiscal Control Board has not authorized yet its full implementation. So we are monitoring and working and lobbying between the dynamics between the local fiscal authority, AFAF, and the board to make sure that everyone understands, that this is not substantially incompatible with the fiscal plan, and that there's a way of correctly measuring the cost benefit as opposed to the way that the advisors for the board did. And this is important for everyone to realize, that we have to be very careful when we are analyzing and coming together to generate public policy, that we measure correctly the impacts of these incentives. The board used a method as if the film industry did not exist. They discounted the benefits by an opportunity cost concept. What if this money, this $100 million, were invested in essential services? So there's a discount. Then they assume, well, many of these productions are going to be done anyway if Puerto Rico doesn't offer the incentives. And then they discounted further the benefit because they assumed that 15% of the projects would be made anyways without the incentive, which is wrong. And then when they use the inputs into their model, and rather than using the salaries and income and tax brackets of a real film project, they use the general population's average salaries and tax bracket, which is hugely discounted. The average in Puerto Rico is about $20-something thousand, when in a film project it's about $70,000, the average worker, and therefore the tax brackets of the enterprises that serve those projects are high as well. So the approach, the method is wrong. And they concluded that the $100 million costs $60 million. So they're trying now to see where the government can find the $60 million. But the crux of the matter is that if this is correctly measured, many of the projects, when you use the right numbers and not discount because of the opportunity cost factor, are positive for the economy, particularly the large projects that bring people from the outside, the television series that create a lot of hotel nights. Those projects are positive for Puerto Rico. And that's only speaking about how much from the incentive granted returns back to the government with taxes, which is what they're calling the ROI, the fiscal ROI. But that's also an incomplete story. And we need to push back. And when we measure these incentives, we need to look at not the return on investment to the treasury, we need to look at the return on the incentive for the whole economy. And that means that we need to also look at the overall economic impact created. And we also need to look at the intangibles. Our numbers with the Estudios Técnicos say that the $100 million really may cost perhaps 10%, $10 million perhaps, there's a net cost to the treasury, but it creates $1 billion of economic activity and close to 10,000 jobs. So isn't that good money? Isn't that a good investment from the government perspective? And then on top of that, we can add intangibles. The intangibles are the promotion of Puerto Rico, the link with the tourism industry, that small and medium-sized businesses are working to support the industry. There are many intangibles. Films, it's not only a business, it's culture, it's art. Then shouldn't we incentivize art as well? So I'm optimist. I think that reason will prevail, but still negotiations are ongoing. But we need to expand the rhetoric, and we need to look at these incentives in the right way. We should not give more than is needed to attract the economic activity, but we need to measure it correctly.
And I would like to also bring up the fact that, on a positive note, this is being addressed. And we also need to talk about infrastructure, opportunities, talent. So maybe Inés can talk a little bit about that, and maybe you can help us speak a little bit about infrastructure. I know that the owners of Tele11, LMG Group, Lieberman Media Group, they have a proposal to develop in Guaynabo a film district to serve the infrastructure for the new up and coming or better business in film. We also have spoken about marketing, script writers, and other services that are necessary by the local producers to grow this market. Inés, can you tell us a little bit about what talent, how the talent is performing, not only the production crews, but the talent that is needed to push the industry forward, and taking into consideration the diversity, equity, and inclusion, which is so important nowadays in the growth of any industry?
In Puerto Rico right now, there's the presence of several of the most important unions in the film business from the United States and international. It's the IATSE, it's an international technicians union, has over 500 members in Puerto Rico, people trained in every aspect of the film business, from coordination to transportation, electricians, camera people, makeup artists, and it's a very well-trained group of people, because Puerto Rico has had the opportunity to grow from the very small, like commercials or music videos or documentaries, to the huge U.S. productions that shoot in Puerto Rico, the Fast Five and so many others. So we have the capacity of growing or working, adapting to work in very different environments. So we've been able to train people, and there's a lot of people that are members of the Directors Guild of America, which is where my position qualifies as a production manager. And also we have a very good talent group in SAG, in the Screen Actors Guild. So the level of the performance of Puerto Rican crew members is comparable and sometimes superior to other jurisdictions, say Atlanta or New York or Los Angeles. And when film producers come here, they are so impressed, because we have had the capacity to move in different formats and different models of film production. One of the things that is more important in our current time is the need for infrastructure. We have infrastructure in terms of equipment. There's a company named PJ Gaffers, and they have now a huge film-based equipment rental house in Puerto Rico and also in the Dominican Republic. And also we have equipment in terms of transportation, all the trailers, all the equipment that's needed for housing a film production. But one of the things that we really badly need is some sound stages. And that's a space for opportunity, because right now, for example, in Atlanta has more than 3 million square feet of sound stages. Los Angeles has 6.2. So Atlanta is moving up, and even for us in the Caribbean, the Dominican Republic has sound stages from Pinewood Studios, that is a franchise, and some investors in Dominican Republic bought the franchise of Pinewood Studios and built stages in the DR, and they built a huge tank for water work. When we do water work, we go, say, like to Ceiba at the Roosevelt Roads, and we do the work without the tanks. So we have been able to have that, ¿cómo se llama? Resiliency is the word that keeps coming up. But it's really interesting in Puerto Rico because we have been able to do the work without the infrastructure, and now with the need to have more infrastructure, our work is gonna shine much bigger than what it is right now. And the DR is a very interesting, it's an interesting comparison because they have the sound stages and they have a tax incentive which is only 25%. So our tax incentive is a lot better, and we have the relationship with the United States. We have the currency, we have the language, we have the training. So Puerto Rico becomes a better place for the development of a film industry. But the Dominican Republic has another thing that's really interesting, is that they are financing, or they are creating the circumstances for local producers to create more local films. The tax incentive for a local film producer in the Dominican Republic is 100%. So there's an investor who's gonna make, have zero risk because the government is gonna return, and then they're being able to create a lot of films, over 20 films a year locally, and they have had the possibility also to create a public that is gonna support them, and that has been able to make the industry grow in a sustained way, which is what we need, because if we had more local producers, that would be the base for the creation of more film crews. Younger people coming up from school will have a lot more workshop, more experience, so that when we have better possibilities for the creation of bigger films, like right now we just did Blue Beetle, one of the Marvel franchise, and yes, DC, I'm sorry. And the director for that film is a Puerto Rican, young Puerto Rican guy who started out in the industry in advertising. So all of the opportunities that we have in the island will create space for other people to grow, and that will help the industry grow in general.
So if you love, because you were talking about opportunities besides infrastructure, I think that there are many interesting things happening. One area that is disrupting and is going to disrupt the film industry is virtual production. And I think that we have the capabilities in Puerto Rico, the programmers, the designers, the people that work in video games, that are being trained in video games, to jump, because that's the intersection of both industries, which then opens the opportunity to grow the video game industry as well, in tandem with the film industry. The video game industry is even larger than the film industry. So,
Yes.
and
I was going to mention some names, but
yes, and which leads me to the other area of opportunity. It happens that one of the best studios with the most innovation, it's called Narwhal Studios, and the founder of the studio is Puerto Rican, Felix Jorge. And there's a bridge that we can, and these people, that there are many Puerto Ricans in the film industry and in the video game industry in high places that are knocking on our door, and they want to come back and do things with Puerto Rico and create those bridges. The opportunities are great. There's this guy in virtual production. There are people in video games. For example, Jose Villeta, who went to school with us. He's in charge of the video game department at Warner Brothers, a large studio, and he wants to look into see what things can be done with Puerto Rico. There's another executive that he's not Puerto Rican, but he's married to a Puerto Rican, and he also wants to open a studio here. And then there are the actors, like Rosalind Sanchez is now a producer and director, and she wants to do her movies here in Puerto Rico. Amaury Nolasco is executive producing with a local producer. Luis Guzman, name actors that have open doors, that have a lot of network that can be offered to local producers, and that we can. And these things are happening. We're working in the development of certain projects with these people as producers, executive producers, and they're opening doors. and using their agents and managers to open the doors. So there's a lot that can be done with not only what we have been doing within Puerto Rico, but what with Puerto Ricans have been doing outside of Puerto Rico. And I think it's the time to make sure that we maximize those opportunities and build those bridges.
We have to broaden that bridge between Puerto Rico and the rest of the world so that we continue to attract all the big talents. We have great actors. We have Oscar-winning actors from entire decades. We have directors, screenwriters. We have, for example, Tony Nardolillo. He's a director. He just directed Righteous Thieves, Shine. He's also a director for Chicago Med and Law and Order, for example. And people like them are willing to come to Puerto Rico and to use Puerto Rico as a platform to develop their ideas because they are from the island and they want to show the world that we are capable of doing a great job, and we are also fertile with talent. And what's next? What do you see? What's next, Inés and Antonio? What do you think is needed for us to broaden that bridge and take that next step forward?
The first thing is that we have to convince the fiscal board to approve our $100 million cap, or just to understand that the business is good business for everybody and there's no need for a cap. Once that happens, then we'll be able to give more opportunities to local producers so that we can create a wider base. And also there's a work that has to be done in terms of promotion. That's a work that used to be a priority for the Economic Development Office before. And after Maria, with all the instability and the bankruptcy, there was a kind of like a refusal to talk about how do we promote the island as a destination for filmmaking because the program is unstable. So once we stabilize and we can tell the government this is good business and it starts to show, then we can promote the island and bring more productions and create more opportunities to local filmmakers as well. And one of the things that I think is very important for us and the position that we have within the American society as Puerto Ricans, still Hispanic, still connected to the Latino population, is to insert ourselves in the need for representation of the Latino in the media. And also because we have to understand that Latinos in the United States is a population that's not being exploited as a consumer of cultural products. And it's like leaving money on the table. There's a lot of people in the Hispanic market that are eager to see themselves represented by films and television shows. And I think Puerto Ricans and the Puerto Rico film business can perfectly help to close that gap between the production of content and the consumption by Latino markets.
I agree with everything, Inés, definitely. I think regarding the tax credit cap, I think that we need to continue the conversations starting now with the Economic Development Department, the Office of Incentives. They hired an external firm, an economic firm called Abexus, and they are supposedly measuring or creating the models to measure the ROI. So we need to make sure that they're doing it right, and that then we can. They already told me that some of the projects are positive, but the past is so. So I think that I trust that they're going to do a good job, and that we should be able to work with them to see what those formulas are, and then look into the cap. The cap should not be arbitrary, and that's the problem. If we don't measure things correctly, the cap ends up being something arbitrary that limits growth, because the industry already has an intrinsic cap. How many productions can we handle simultaneously? And that's a factor of human resources and infrastructure. And isn't that what we want to grow? Is that the growth? So the question is how to grow. How much does it cost, and how much is it reasonable for the government to invest in the growth and the economic development of the sector. So, but definitely, I think that there are great opportunities, and now I think it's the right time to look into this and take advantage of all of the disruptions and changes that are happening in the film industry.
So you say that if we develop a platform that can connect all the dots, would be a correct thing to look at. Not only the investment side between the government and private citizens or private investors, we also would need like what you used to use as a black book, your black book where you had all the phones of everybody that you used to work with or you work with, the writers, the crews. So create a space where everyone can connect to the rest, because maybe a script writer doesn't know or doesn't have access to the marketing team that could work with their project and so on and so forth. So maybe that would be a great opportunity.
I agree, Sajo, and you're in the advertising industry, and one of the things that we've observed is that sometimes one of the lacking areas for local producers is marketing. So this type of conversations, when that we can expand the network and the group of the people that start working with the producers when they start developing a project, when they start working on their business plan. What is the correct route? How am I going to market myself? How am I going to market my product? I think that it would be very interesting to start opening the conversation into the advertising and marketing industry as well.
Excellent. Anything you would like to add, Inés? Well,
I'm wondering if some people might have some questions.
I know that someone in the audience flew from LA, Mr. Winter Horton. We had a chat earlier this morning. You are the proponent for the film district in Guaynabo. Would you like to add anything to that? Talk about the partnership between private investment and government investment?
Sure. For those of you that don't know me, Winter Horton, my business partner, and I purchased Tele Once about, well, it's been 3 years now. I was new to the island and found it to be just an incredible place. The labor pool, as Inés was saying, I think is fantastic. Not crazy about the unions, but that's another story. We have expanded greatly, grown from, I think when we bought the station, I had about 60 employees. We're up over 300 now and doing, I don't know, 17 hours or something of live, original local production every day. So I believe in the island. About a year ago, we started putting together this idea, because I noticed the same thing that this great panel has been pointing out, that the infrastructure here to make films is non-existent. If you look at the movies that have been made, it's all kind of exteriors, and a lot of them are filming Puerto Rico as whatever, Vietnam or some other country. So it seems very logical that to build a studio facility here would energize the business. Kind of if we build it, hopefully it'll come. I think the tax incentive issue is weighing heavily on my development, but I do believe that in the end the government will do the right thing because it makes sense, and ultimately I think people hopefully find the right path and want to create revenue. So we have a plan to build 6 full-size sound stages. We have a company out of Southern California that designs stages. We've got preliminary drawings. We've applied for the CDBG funds for tourism. We're waiting for results from that. It'll be in Guaynabo. We've already locked up the land and the lease deal with the municipality. So we're moving forward with that. I believe that for all the reasons these people have said, Puerto Rico is going to be a much better place to make movies than the DR. And I think we could attract a lot of productions. Some of the red tape the government's putting down is not easy. I think that's what we need the collective brains in this room to help with. but we're willing to invest heavily and have been and will continue to do so. I can't tell you how great I think this island is, and we're going to be here for a long time. So happy to talk with anybody if anybody has any great ideas of how to get these tax incentives approved. I like the no cap idea. That's even better. But we're moving forward. So
How would it be too much to ask on what would be the number of the investment dedicated to this film district?
right now the project involves the 6 sound stages, the support buildings. We're building a hotel, retail ground floor, and then condominiums or apartments up above that. Kind of, if people have been to LA, think the brand Americana or the Grove. Kind of cross that with Universal City Walk. That's what we're planning on building. I think the budget right now is about 155 million. So we definitely need government help on that, which we've applied for, and I think it would make a huge impact, not only on Guaynabo, but just in general. I think the addition of 6 full service sound stages, where none exist right now, would jumpstart the film industry in a big way. So yeah.
Any other questions?
Por aquí. Good morning. Sajo, again, on behalf of the organization, Inés, Antonio, thank you for doing this panel for us. Quick question. There seems to be a natural synergy of including the music industry, the creating of videos with your industry. Has there been talks about doing that?
The music industry is strong in Puerto Rico, and video production and film behind these musical productions is very much important for the marketing and for the distribution of the talent and the music, and for the artists to propel forward. I believe we have people like Cacho and Zapatero Films and many others that are really growing in that sense. Would you like to add to that, Inés?
When you see some of the music videos that are produced for artists like Bad Bunny or Calle 13, these are pieces of art, and they are very well produced, short films. And there's been interest between, like, Calle 13, René Perez, he's one of our artists, and he went to SCAD in Georgia, and he's interested in developing his filmmaking career. So there's been move from those artists, and some talks also about Bad Bunny. He's become an actor now, and he's super psyched about the idea of producing other pieces of filmmaking. Also, Draco Rosa, who's another one of our, endeared actors and musicians. There's a series that we're developing, and he's going to be an actor, and he's part of the writing and part of the creation. So there's that relationship between musicians and filmmakers that's always been there, but it's very interesting to exploit and to look further into that.
It's creating jobs firsthand. My daughter is a makeup artist in the film industry, and she works in feature films, series, music videos, commercials, anything. For them, it's just creating great audiovisual products.
So we've talked about advertising, we've talked about production for brands, for music, for gaming, and there's a lot of opportunity in Puerto Rico. The film industry is still at a stage where it's very fertile, and it has a lot of capacity to grow in many different ways. Any other questions, please?
Yes, we have one more question.
As the entertainment industry goes digital, these new facilities are basically data centers. So they need connectivity, and most importantly, they need amperage. So friends of mine who've operated high-end post-production houses in places like San Francisco literally ran out of amperage. Like it just, New York too, there just isn't any more. So as Puerto Rico looks to improve the grid, can there be improvements in the grid that drive better amperage, better electricity, more reliable electricity to these new districts so that huge investments are, are always up and running and in production? So that's my question.
Agree. Question?
That's super important, and also like there's a movement in the U.S. studios. Like I did Fantasy Island last year, and the studios are moving into sustainability. So they have a lot of interest in developing, say, generators that are solar based. So that's something that's interesting to explore too.
Two quick thoughts. One, Americana, The Grove, and Universal City Walk are my three favorite places in LA. I was born in Hollywood, and so it sounds like a great project. I hope it gets the 150 million. I would just say that what I hope you're thinking of is artificial intelligence, because next year you will be able to make a whole movie by just going and giving prompts to make a movie. And this is going to hit Hollywood, a place that I care about. It's my hometown, like a freight train in a big way. And I would just say that if you want to make a movie industry that is resilient and adaptable, then Puerto Rico should have a highest level crisis emergency level way of training the population to be ready for AI. So that just a thought.
Yeah, virtual production and the AI.
That would be another opportunity to look at. Definitely AI is making a fast forward, and we welcome the first AI film. That would be fantastic.
Just a final note, we have a mutual friend whose entire business is based around greening the sets of Hollywood to make sure that they're from start to end as green and as efficient from an ecological standpoint as possible. So I'm happy to connect you with that person.
That'd be great, yes.
Yes, because CO2 footprints and the impact that any type of industry has on the environment is very important to consider in the planning of future projects. Those are also very welcome. And those are decision-making opportunities, because investors and projects that have that set into their formula are more suited to be selected, I believe, to move forward.